Hello Leominster Baptist Church. Thank you very much for joining us for this video update. I hope you're doing well and looking after yourselves. You know, as I think back to the nearer the start of this year, I remember a conversation I had with the Caping Race students as they were talking about what they were going to do next and where they were going to go as they carried on their studies or returned home. And some of them were talking about going to Italy to visit there. And at that time, there was this news of a virus that had spread around Italy and was causing all sorts of chaos. And as I think back to that moment, it's hard to imagine that 4 months down the line, we would be in this situation. It's hard to imagine back then that we wouldn't have been attending a gathering in this place for 14 weeks now, is it 15, maybe 16 weeks, well over 100 days, over 4 months, where we wouldn't have gathered here, that everything that we were doing, all the activities and services and ways of mission and outreach would have come to a stop, that we would be communicating in different ways and we would have heard of things called Zoom and people who'd never touched technology were suddenly experts on their phones. So much has changed and so much is different, and I don't think what comes next is going to be any different. This video is really an update on our thinking and our thoughts about what happens next and where we go. I'm sure most of you will be well aware that the government has lifted restrictions on being able to gather in buildings, but there are still lots of elements to think about through that. And what we want to do in this video is simply try and outline a pathway forward that guides us and helps us take our next steps. The last few months we have talked about looking for a new normal, a normal that isn't just behind us, but a normal that we're heading towards. We've talked about discovering what God has for us. We've talked about having everything stripped away and coming back to what matters most. And all those things, I think, come into play and really matter when we think about how we move forward and how we progress as a church. As you heard the announcement that services could resume, I'm sure you felt that desire, that pull to get back as soon as possible. We all did, and even if you aren't able to, or you don't feel that that's a safe thing for you to do, there's still within us this desire to gather again. One thing that we've realized over this time, something we all perhaps knew was true anyway, but we realize that church is wherever we gather or scatter and are aware of our calling as disciples of Jesus. We knew that, but the lockdown has really brought that into focus, and we've had to be church, scattered where we are in the places that we are until our buildings could open once more. But there is in us a desire to return to this gathering together, and that's today what I want to think through and just explain what things are contributing to that and what factors are at play as we consider that together. The deacons have discussed this, the trustees have discussed it, we've talked with organisations like the FIEC and Baptist Union, we've even looked at the Methodist guidelines, we've had conversations with people, we've put out the survey to get feedback from others, we've spoken to other churches. One thing is clear, no one's ever done this before. No one's ever had to operate as a church in the midst of a pandemic, at least not in living memory. And so we are paving new ground, we are working out as we go. And so let me just give you a few factors that play into our thinking, just to help you understand the decisions that we're trying to make and the path that we're trying to walk. The idea of how do we restart services, what does it look like to restart services, obviously dominates our thinking. But the other question that we've been guided to that I think is also helpful is how can we use our buildings and how can we worship in a way that will serve us as people to be disciples and serve our local community? And that's a slightly different question. The reason that we ask that is because when we ask what do services do, what's the purpose of a service? The unique thing that happens when we gather is we get to have fellowship, that encouragement, that building each other up, that touching base, checking up on people, finding out how we are and loving one another in that environment. That's the one thing that happens. We miss corporate worship, that lifting of voices together to praise God. Something about that does something for us, that standing with others and praising Jesus together is good for us and glorifying to God. And also that act of serving one another in word and deed with interaction and acts that we do, that we get to serve people, we get to serve guests. That all happens uniquely when we gather. And so we're not so much asking how do we get back to a service, but we're asking how do we get back to that fellowship and that worship and that service of one another that we long for, the thing that we're really missing. And that's going to be different, and that's going to look different, but that's kind of our consideration. How do we promote that? How do we encourage that? At the same time, we also want to recognize that the gathering together isn't going to be possible for everyone. That some, it's just not going to be feasible for them to come back, or they're not going to feel safe to do so. And so just as important in what do we do to make that possible, we also want to ask, how do we do that? And how do we do it in the way of Jesus, reflecting the heart of Jesus? One in particular the passage that's come to mind in this is when Jesus prays with his disciples at the Last Supper, one of the last times, one of the deepest times with his disciples as he talks with them. And he prays this long prayer, and the whole point of this prayer is summed up when Jesus says, "Lord, may they be one as we are one." And so whilst we're looking at how we can make a larger gathering possible, we also want to look at how can we move together as one. We want to be united in this. We want to move forward as one. We don't want it to be possible for some and not for others, or some to feel like they're left out or left behind. We want to help every person move as far as they feel possible towards the fellowship that we need, and the worship that we need, and the serving of one another that we need. And so we want to consider that. How can we do it, not just what we do, but how do we do it in a way that encourages everyone and brings everyone along and involves everyone on that? The last thing that I think we consider is the lessons that we can learn from this being locked down, this being scattered to where we are. And those two elements that I put on the screen, that scattered locations and that gathered location, is quite powerful. And also quite a helpful framework in helping us take our next steps and think forward. So we're not thinking either or, we're thinking both and. Both, there's going to be a need for scattered locations for some, because they won't be able to gather, but there'll also be a need for the gathered thing, the one location where we can come together as one people and worship God. And that's going to be the framework that we think as we go forward and take our next steps. So let me just outline our thinking in terms of the steps that we're doing now, what we think comes next, and then a bit further down the line. Of course, all of this is dependent on so many different factors, but it's helpful just to have something in mind. So the first thing that we're doing at the moment, and already started to encourage, is in scattered locations, so in small groups in different parts of the county or the town. The online services will continue. We'll still make them available and put them out as we're doing each week. And smaller groups are being encouraged to meet up, either to watch the service or after the service. And so we've already did that as part of last week in the message. I put it in the newsletter as well. And once again, I can remind you that you can do that. 2 households, maintaining social distance if you're in a home. 6 people from multiple households if you're in a garden. And again, 6 people from multiple households if you're in an outdoor space, maintaining distance. And so we'd again encourage you to do that. That's part of this first steps. These first small steps to fellowship and to worship, where you can pray and be together in a way that lifts up Jesus, where you can serve one another in those small ways. And that is key. For some people, that'll be as far as they feel they'll be able to go. And so it's important that they take those steps. For those who are shielding, they might be able to join up with one other person. For those who feel vulnerable, they might be more happy in a smaller group. For those who feel able, they might gather in the larger size, up to 6 people, or in 2 households. But we're encouraging you to do that as these first steps towards what we need: fellowship and worship and serving one another. In terms of the gathered location, the building here on Etnam Street, the building's being prepared. So I'll show you a picture now of how the chairs are laid out, so you get an idea of what that looks like. That's 2 meter spacing between them, sat in pairs. Obviously that might not work, and so we're going to have to work out how to adjust that if the time comes. But all sorts of things are being put in place: signage and one-way systems and policies and procedures and all sorts of things to make sure the building's prepared. You may have seen the documents. I'll attach them to this email so you can have a look through them. They're what we're working through and trying to keep things in line with that. We are sticking to them. We know that some of them are contradictory, some of them are confusing, but we're going to abide by them. We want to make this a place that the most vulnerable person feels safe coming to. And so we're going to be doing that. And that's our first steps towards this goal. These are our first steps: online services in scattered locations, people gathering, and in this place, getting things ready. Once we've moved on in that, and in a few weeks' time, the next step is in the scattered locations that the online services will continue. So there'll still be something available for those who want to gather in that way. The smaller groups continue to meet, so we're still going to encourage that, possibly in larger numbers. Obviously that depends on the relaxing of restrictions, but so that's going to continue, and we hope that that carries on. In terms of the gathered location, the first steps that we're going to take into introducing people here is that we would like to show you the video that goes out online, but in this building. So nothing different to what everyone else is getting, but the video being shown, and to invite a few people, a number of people limited to attend, so that we can test out what we've put in place. So we can make sure that it works, that the building works, we can identify any issues or problems that might be coming up, and work out what needs to be done to make this place as safe as possible. And then following that, to invite a number of people to come and join in the services. So showing the video, but to be part of the services here, as we open it up for others. Obviously that doesn't mean that everyone can gather at the same time. We're limited on space, and so the number of people who can be here, and so we haven't quite got a system yet for how we do that, and how people were able to find places and how we accommodate people, and so that's still in progress. But we are also going to be looking at an outdoor service. Again, that's dependent on restrictions being eased, but to have a gathering outside where we can have a larger number, hopefully, and the restrictions are less, it's easier thing to manage and to clean up after, and all the other things that need to be in place. And so that will be part of that next step as we go forward. As we think a bit further down the line, and again, as I've said, this is dependent on a number of things, but we'd say the smaller groups still continue, but during the service and after, where appropriate or needed, so that there's still something for those people who feel like they can't attend. There's still some sort of gathering for them to be a part of. And then in the gathered location, so we're here, at some point we'll begin to add live elements. So we'll add prayers in, and we'll add readings in, and we'll add testimonies and perhaps preaching at some point to be included in that. And then we'll start thinking about multiple services and locations to accommodate more people, and eventually we'll probably be recording from here and make the recording here available to people. And so that's kind of an outline of what we see happening. And so it starts small, it starts in the small groups, and it sort of just builds from there until it gets bigger and bigger until we're able to gather here. The reason we want to do it like that is that we want to take steps. So much is changing and changes week by week. And so the restrictions are easing in one case, and yet they're being reinforced in another. So we want to be careful as we move forward. There are things that we haven't worked out yet, how to allocate services and manage numbers. And so there are still things that need to be figured out in time. We're also very aware that we want to keep the mission of the church. We want to make this a place that guests feel welcome to, that people wandering in have a place for, and so we want to work out how that looks. We don't want to just be filled with all of us and no room for anyone who might be seeking God at this time, so that's another consideration we want to make. And the time frame around this is really paced by the practicalities, so it's going to take time to get things in place, and so that's going to be a factor. But also, as I said, that we want to move together as one. I think someone once said, if you want to go fast, you go alone. And if you want to go far, you go together. And we intend to go together, to organise and gather in a way that we can move everyone along at the right pace, and so that we're safe and secure in how we do that, and we're bringing everyone along with us as we do so. And so that's an outline. And that is all it is. There is things that might change, there are things that are up in the air, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a framework, a bit of an idea of what that looks like. I've attached a document that outlines this, and it's got a few more details on there of other things that might be taking place, and so have a look at that if you want more information and time frames and things like that. But as I said, just as important as the what of what we're going to do is also the how. And there are just three things that I want to highlight on the spirit in which we want to do this, that I think will help us in our understanding and our thinking about what comes next. The first thing that I think the spirit we need is a spirit of openness. In the context of the large gathering in particular, there's a recognition and an openness to the fact that it will be different, that there will be restrictions in place and it will be managed in a very different way to what we're used to. Not necessarily bad or wrong, but different. And so that means we need to be open and being creative also in how we express worship and enjoy fellowship together. In fact, I kind of get excited because I think there are going to be ways of worship and ways of gathering and ways of being the people of God together that are going to be new, ways that have laid dormant for years that just haven't been explored, and we get to try them out and we get to figure out what it means in this new normal to worship and to gather and to serve with all these restrictions in place. The picture I have is kind of like the persecuted church in parts of the world, where for reasons outside of their control they are restricted in how they can gather, and yet gather they do, and gather it quietly and gather silently, but the presence of God is powerfully among them, and they treasure it and they value it, and it's still just as wonderful as the loudest, noisiest, freest worship service. And I kind of think we're going to get a taste of that, of exploring what it means to experience God in this strange environment and yet finding God is still with us. And so we need to be open to that, open to new ways of encountering God and experiencing Him and worshipping Him together. The other side, the other spirit that we need is the spirit of humility. If we've learnt one lesson from the last 6 months or so, is that the phrase God willing is not just a Christian cliche that we need to say. It's a deep reality that we embrace. We have no crystal ball. We have our best laid plans and a hope for the future, but they're all God willing. And so there is a humility that's needed to change course, to adjust, to respond appropriately, to be guided. I think of Acts when Paul has a plan, I'm going to go to this place, and the Holy Spirit comes and says, no, you go in this direction. And we need that humility to be corrected and guided as we go forward. And we also need a humility in regards to each other. I think of Philippians 3 where it says, have the same mindset of Christ. And then it says, humbly consider others more significant than yourself. And that's so relevant to this time, that there will be some who can go at a quick pace and some who can't. But as I've already said, we want to go together, and that's going to take humility on the part of some, and gentleness as we walk together in a sense of unity, progressing as one and being filled with God who is one and makes us one. And so we want to be open and we want to be humble, and we also want to be prayerful. The foundation of this is prayer. When Jesus modeled this, he prayed for them. God, may they be one as we are one. And so there are going to be things to figure out. There's going to be wisdom that's needed. There are going to be battles that are going to need to be won, and we don't want to lose them because we give up in prayer too soon. We want to be continuous. And I love that the early church had this. They were founded on prayer. They had no buildings, no place to gather. They met in homes where they could. In an odd way, we're kind of closer to what we see there than at any other time. But prayer is the thing that drives them and gives them boldness and gives them courage and gives them wisdom and insight into the heart of God. Like I said, not just to know what to do, but also to know how to do it. And so the deacons have said, wouldn't it be wonderful if one of the first things we do when we gather is just pray? Not complicated, not add anything, just to pray together. And so we're going to be putting that out and encouraging those little groups that can start together to make prayer a real focus in this and a real foundation for our next steps. Humble, open, and prayerful. That's the spirit that I think we need as we approach this. There are, I'm sure, many questions. If you have any, then please ask. If you want anything clarifying, then please let us know. For now, as I've said, we carry on. We'll be preparing this place and getting things ready, trying to get everything safe and secure and policies in place. Again, I would encourage you to consider meeting with one another and arranging a time to begin those first steps. If it's not for your sake, for the sake of others who might not feel confident, that you would encourage them to take those small steps into fellowship and being with one another. And for now, what I'd like to do is just finish by praying. Be asking God to draw near. Thank you so much for all your prayers, for all your encouragement, for all of your appreciation of the tricky task that it is to work out what's next. We hope this makes sense, and we hope you can see the heart behind it, to journey together and to discover something new of God, but to do it as one, as His people. Let's pray. Father, it is something of a privilege to to be in this moment of time in this church. That you would count us worthy of being your people at this moment. That we would have this responsibility to take these steps and to move in a way that honours and glorifies you. And I pray that wouldn't be a responsibility that weighs us down and crushes us, but it would be one full of anticipation and even excitement and hope and joy at what might be possible and what might be just around the corner and what we might find as we journey with you. I'm sure for many there is a sense still of fear, of hesitation. Change is always a strange thing and a challenging thing. And so I ask, Holy Spirit, I ask that you would be a welcome presence. I ask that you would stop us on this path where we need to be stopped. I ask that you would direct us where we need to be directed. And I ask that you would fill us right now for the task that's ahead. Fill us with the love of Christ that is open to you because we know that nothing bad will ever come from your hand. Fill us with that spirit of Christ, of humility towards you, God, and our place in this world and towards each other as we love one another along the way. Fill us with that spirit that guides us in prayer, to pray after your heart and to pray for your kingdom to come and your will to be done. And give us the desire and the persistence to match it, Lord, that we might be fit for the task. I thank you for these people. I personally thank you for the privilege of loving them through this. And I lean now on the resources, on the power, on the grace, and the love of Christ. My only source, my only foundation, my only hope. And I pray that over this church now. Bless them, Father. Fill them with your Spirit. Guide them in your purpose. Release them with your power. May your grace be with them and your face shine on us. And if you don't go before us, Father, don't take us any further. But if you go, we will follow. In the name of Jesus. Amen.